Hello and welcome back to the F2 show. I'm your host, Fraser Ford, and I'm joined today by Inside F2 editor, Hannah Prufrook, GP Grandstand's Jim Kimberley, and we have a special guest today. Our special guest is Jack Aitken, Williams Formula 1 reserve driver and HWA Formula 2 driver. Coming up on today's show, we look ahead to Silverstone as Motorsport is set to come home, unless at least something's going to. Our panel discuss who are the drivers and teams to watch out for this weekend, and we ask your questions to Jack and the rest of the panel. And I'm sorry for the Euros comment, guys. I'm still struggling to get over the result. It was a tough blow. But Jack, I want to start with you. Back in Formula 2 this season, was it a surprise when you got the call, and how much have you enjoyed being back on the grid this season?
It was a little bit of a surprise. I know the team. I think he's team manager there. There's so many different ways. Team principal, team manager. I don't know what the difference is between all of them. Anyway, I know him from a long time ago when we were racing at Arden in GP3, and we're still quite good friends. And they had a bit of a situation with one of their drivers, and they wanted someone with experience to come in and give them a bit of feedback on the car as well. So that's been a nice. I definitely wasn't expecting to do it, and to do Monaco, Baku, and Silverstone, probably the three best tracks I could have picked. So pretty happy just to be able to go and run.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you assess the season so far? Both obviously Formula 2 season and also your GT season as well. Those cars are really fun to drive.
Yeah, they're mega. I mean, it's been something really different, which is quite refreshing because, the Formula 2 is super impressive car to drive, obviously. But I've been in that paddock because GP3 and F2, same paddock basically, for the last 5 years. And I know everybody there really well. It's a whole community of familiar faces, and it's quite tight knit. And it's the same format every weekend. And it's just nice to do something different and something where I don't really know any of the drivers. I don't really know the teams. I'm even messing up like my timetables because I'm like getting confused between sprint format and endurance format and 6-hour races and 24-hour races with different rules. And it's been a steep learning curve, but the pace has been good, which is always nice. It's just learning how to deal with all the other stuff that's pretty new for me.
Yeah, good. And Jim, obviously great to have you back with us. Baku last time out is pretty exciting, wasn't it? Obviously championship leader Guan Yu Zhou only picked up 10 points, which has blown the title open a little bit. The championship battle is on now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it just seems like so long ago at this point. This new calendar is just really having massive gaps between all the races. So yeah, it's a bit wild how many months it's been. Is it 6 weeks since we were at Baku? It's bonkers, isn't it? So yeah, it's great. The championship fight well and truly on, and having more victors again, and having Robert Schwartzman turn up after a bit of a disappointing start. It's anybody's, and Joe really needs to clench his fist on how he started the season if he wants to really look into pursuing the title this year. And I think he really needs to get the title this year. He's in a strong position. But yeah, I'm really excited, potentially with Vips as well, rocketing up with great performance. And we're halfway through the season, and I couldn't tell you who is going to win it. I couldn't even predict the top 5 at this point in any order. It's just so wild, as Formula 2 so often is. But really exciting. Silverstone, we've got 3 races that could be hugely influential in the championship. So any of these drivers get a 0 points weekend, that could make everything topsy-turvy. So I'm just so excited to see Formula 2 back and not having a clue on what's going to happen.
Yeah, it really is. It's classic Formula 2 this season, and absolutely crazy. And Hannah, obviously great to have you back with us again. Baku was a little bit of a game-changing weekend. Jim's just mentioned it. Robert Schwartzman and Yuri Vips obviously throwing themselves into the mix as well. You know, how important is that for those guys?
I think it's majorly important for the morale as well. I think for a lot of the drivers, especially, for example, Robert Schwartzman, a lot of us predicted he was going to have a strong season from the outset, considering his pace last year. And unfortunately, sometimes things didn't work out for them. And heading into Silverstone, we saw last year, Silverstone made or broke a lot of drivers' championship potential that time around, and it'll be halfway through the season. So for them, it's kind of difficult to build up momentum. I think, obviously, you've said it's been 6 weeks since the last race. Building that momentum is going to be crucial heading into the rest of the season. And I'm excited to see kind of how much the championship fight narrows. I think if a couple of drivers have some good performances, they could possibly push themselves into title contention. So I think we're going to be set for another amazing weekend at Silverstone.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. I definitely can't wait. Let's take a look at the championship standings then after round 3. Guan Yu Zhou tops the standings with 78 points after 3 rounds, but is really close at the top. Oscar Piastri closing the gap to just 5 points. As we've already mentioned, strong weekends from Robert Schwartzman and Yuri Vips pushed them into championship contention. They're followed by Dan Ticktum and Teo Porcher. And the team standings, Prema are now top of the team standings after a total of 3 podiums in Baku. They leapfrogged UNI Virtuosi, who dropped to second in the standings, and they're just 6 points ahead of Hitech and Carlin. If you want to see the full standings, head over to www.insidef2.com. Jack, I want to get your take on the championship battles so far. Who's impressed you the most this season?
I think, like you said, it's been really open, classic F2, but even more so this year with the extra reverse grid race. I mean, it's something that I noticed when I came back, that I think for somebody who's contending for the championship, it's quite a tricky format because it really doesn't favour you, actually. And it's very easy to get caught up in accidents in the first sprint race, and that can really derail things. So I think, Guan Yu's been fairly consistent without setting the world on fire. I mean, not the best round last time out, but he's usually been in the mix of that top 10 and always safe in that reverse grid bubble. Otherwise, I think it was pretty impressive what Pourchaire did in Monaco. Obviously, is he racing this weekend at Silverstone?
He is.
Has he recovered?
Yeah,
he has. Okay, all right. So that's good. But yeah, he did a really good job there, I think, and showed pretty good pace, even if he's maybe not quite as consistent as some of the other guys and has had a few spills here and there. And yeah, I mean, there's probably more guys that I'm surprised that who have underperformed or have had a lot of bad luck or accidents. It seems like there's been quite a few casualties this year, maybe partly because of that new format.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, isn't it? And Hannah, Silverstone is such a historic track, isn't it? The home of motorsport. What makes this place so special?
I think a lot of things, to be honest, but for me, the biggest one has to be the fans. I think everyone talks about the Tifosi in Italy, and also in F1, Max Verstappen has his Dutch fans, or when he goes over to Belgium as well. But the British fans just take motorsport into the heart and will support drivers up and down the grid, whether you're at the front or at the back. And it'll be exciting as well because we'll have full capacity there, sellout crowds. Obviously, F1 will have their sprint race format as well, so it'll be interesting to see how that compares to how F2 operates. But I think just the whole weekend, Silverstone last time around with the double header and having the 70th anniversary there, it was great, but it just missed that atmosphere that I think defines that circuit so well. And also, I think you can't underestimate how good of a circuit Silverstone is. It provides a lot of challenges. I'm a big fan of kind of going through Stowe, or even simple things like just looking at the track in general. It's such a brilliant layout for racing and provides a lot of challenges for the drivers to manage. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether some of the experienced drivers, how they manage it, and whether it catches out some of the newer drivers, because there's a couple of them that haven't either raced at Silverstone at all or have had a little bit of a while away from it.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. Now, we've got our own track guide of Silverstone. I sat down with Luke earlier on in the week to kind of go into the circuit with a little bit more detail. If you guys at home want to check that out, head over to our YouTube channel and it is on there. Jack, obviously you've got, you had 2 podiums around here last season, which, isn't bad, I suppose. It's very, very, very impressive. What are the secrets to putting a good lap together around here?
I'm not putting that out in public. It's all staying up there. No, I think Silverstone is a track that requires a lot of confidence with all the high-speed sections, not necessarily because it's a scary place to go, because you've got quite a lot of runoff these days, more because, especially for the sequences like Maggots and Beckett's, and even Brooklands and Luffield, where you're going from one corner into the other. You have to be really precise, and you have to get the timing of the driving very, very spot on, basically, to really nail a lap, especially in quali. And yeah, you can only do that if you're really happy with the car and feeling comfortable, and you can really commit to those braking points, turning points, getting back on the throttle. So yeah, just have to be confident.
There's no more British answer than saying you have to be spot on.
Spot on, yeah. It's a good way to say it, isn't it?
Jack, have you got a favourite part of the track of yours, or?
Oh, that's a hard one. I've got a few. I mean, I really like Brooklands, because you've got the BRDC clubhouse on your right as you approach, and a lot of the time there's a lot of friends and family watching from there. You've got the big British flag, and you've got the big grandstands right in front of you as well, and you can usually do some good overtaking moves there as well. So it's a nice spot. But then it's hard to beat Cops and flying into Maggots and Beckett's, just because it's so fast, and in the car like an F2, you really get a good sensation of speed.
Jim, Guan Yu Zhou, one of the few drivers on the grid that actually has, more than a few seasons worth of experience around this track and at this level, as same as Jack. Can he use that experience at a circuit like this to cement his championship lead?
He has to, if he wants to have a real championship fight. Like I said, it's going to be his time that he needs to clench his fist on going forwards with it. And Silverstone's really a track that so many drivers have affinity with, just because of how important it is in motorsport, particularly the British teams. And Joe spent a lot of time in the UK, and naturally you're going to spend a lot of time at Silverstone because of that. So I expect him to go out. But I think Jack's got a really good point of just, you can go and get into that top 10 bubble, and that's a safe thing. And we see that over and over. And I know, Hannah, you do a lot of Formula E, and just scoring points consistently through the season is the key to winning the championship. We saw last year with Schumacher, it wasn't going out and getting wins every time out to try and get the championships, just scoring points. So Joe just needs to not get into much difficulty in the reverse grid race, because that could really upset his entire weekend. I think Jack also has a good point with the amount of runoff, which could really be beneficial. That after the street circuits we've had, and more street circuits upcoming, and I'll say Sochi is one of those as well, that this could be a bit more of a forgiving race. So we might see some different type of racing from Joe and the other drivers, just because they've got a bit more runoff, which could be really exciting to see. We saw, was it Marcus last time out, had a bit of difficulty into turn 3, I think it was, at Baku, and it just had a difficult weekend because of that sort of issue, trying to get 3 abreast going into a 90-degree corner. It's not so big a deal at Silverstone because there is runoff. Was it 2 years ago when we saw Leclerc and Verstappen going, where were they? The last corner, and they were going absolutely hammer and tongs at it. And you can run wide and you can go on the tarmac, and then you can fight back. That's the sort of stuff we like to see. And as many times people say you like to see unforgiving tracks, I do like to see cars continue on and recover points, especially Formula 2. You're going to have a safety car at some point. So closes the field up, and then you get to see the drivers racing again. So it could be a good time for Joe to put his foot down and try and get a win, but I don't think he has to.
It's a good point you mentioned that, obviously there's 4 street circuits on the calendar this season, and it is, we've just come off the back of Monaco and Baku, where there isn't much runoff. So it's really nice to have a bit of runoff in there, so that drivers can actually battle and not have to worry about, if I go wide, then that's race over.
Yeah, it's I'm not the biggest fan of this calendar, and after speaking to some Formula 2 and Formula 3 drivers as well, and Jack might have an opinion on this, the Formula 3 calendar certainly seemed to be a little bit more traditional focused and a bit more popular. We have to wait and see how Saudi Arabia turns out. It might be the best track in the world. We don't know. But yeah, the unfortunate nature of this move to a reduced number of weekends is that you are going to have to lose some tracks. And I would like to see a Formula 2 calendar, let's say Formula 2, Formula 3, all the support series calendars have a bit more of a split between the street circuits and the traditional, let's call them traditional circuits. So it's a shame that we are so street circuit focused, I think, this time around. I'd be quite curious to see if there's any feedback for next year, to see what the calendar will be then. But I'm really glad that Silverstone's come around, and right at a good time as well, at middle of the season, the most traditional of tracks you're going to get in the sport. So I'm really excited to see the drivers back at a traditional circuit. It seems like such a long time ago that the Formula 2 drivers would have seen grass.
It was, it was, in Austria, it was a bit weird seeing the Formula 3 guys there and not the Formula 2 guys, wasn't it? We're so used to seeing the Formula 2 guys in Austria, so that was a shame. Hannah, obviously, Robert Schwartzman had a difficult couple of weekends last year in Silverstone. Had a 13th place finish, a 14th place finish, an 8th place finish, and then another 13th place finish, albeit one of those races was obviously battling for the lead with Mick Schumacher, his teammate, and things didn't quite go the way that they probably thought or hoped that they were going to. Is that going to be on his mind this weekend?
I think to some degree it will be. I think there's always going to be an element of looking back at what happened last time and maybe taking the lessons from it. I feel like if him and Piastri got into a similar battle, hopefully for both of them, it wouldn't end the same way. I think looking at the pace the Prem has had, I think he's actually done pretty well at Silverstone in the past. So in 2019 in F3, he got a 5th place and a 2nd place finish. He can do well at that track. It was just unfortunate that both Premers seemed to have a drop off in pace. For him, it probably did end up being kind of the nail in the coffin for his championship campaign, because you can't afford to have 2 consecutive underperforming weekends. But for him going into it now, he can take what he's learned from those weekends and think, actually, no, the Premers got the pace. I know I can do it. And I think he'll be very much determined to get on the podium, to maybe prove some people wrong that maybe think this is his weak spot, and hopefully continue to get his championship campaign underway and jump his teammate. He's 3rd in the standings. He's got just as good of a shot as he did last time around. And I think for him, if he can jump Oscar, if he can get himself to the top of the standings after Silverstone, it would do wonders for the rest of his championship battle, because we've all seen how easily it can turn around in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, exactly. And Jim, another Brit that we've spoken about, obviously Dan Ticktum. We speak about him regularly on the show. Can he go on, this weekend? And he won the race last year with Dan's sprint race with Dams last year. He's got the home advantage, home fans around him as well. Is this a chance for him to do well?
Yeah, well, every race, of course, is a chance for him to do well, and he's been a really good package this year. I think he's shown. We mentioned the maturity and everything. I think every time we've mentioned him on the podcast, and I'm not going to be surprised if he does win a race. He's certainly showing the speed, and we saw the overtakes he was performing last time out, that he's got the confidence as well. I think going into the team, and I don't want to be mean about it, but showing up his teammates so soon is a real stamp of authority. And I actually wanted to briefly mention what Hannah was speaking about with Schwartzman. I think, forget the Silverstone curse for Schwartzman. I think he wants to really show that Piastri is the Formula 3 driver who needs to calm down, and I'm here and it's my turn to win the championship with Prem and not yours. With Ticktum, home fans, full house, it could really be a terrific, let's say with Lewis Hamilton as well, and the amount of British drivers with Chadwick we've got in W Series, all these drivers, and Jack, of course, yourself, all these drivers at Silverstone this weekend, it could be a really, really good showing for the British fans, who, a lot of them, Hannah not included, might be looking to make themselves feel a bit better after the football. So, yeah, Formula 1, Formula 2 and W Series is coming home, and we could see the British flag on the top step of the podium several times across the weekend, Ticktum included.
Jim, I thought we weren't talking about the football anymore. I'm still struggling to get over it. Jack, can you hear the fans from the cockpit, or is that something that you're just so focused on the race that you don't really realise it until the in that?
It's pretty hard to beat a Formula 2 engine, but sometimes you can. Like when I won there in 2019. I could see all the fans, but I didn't hear them until the cool-down lap after the checkered flag, when obviously you're not going full speed anymore. The engine noise is a bit lower. And then I actually could hear them, which was really, really cool. But it's a rare occasion. Yeah.
Does that inspire you? If you can see them, for example, you can hear them if you make a move, for example, and you really hear them erupt. Does that inspire you a little bit, or is that again, are you so focused that you don't really think about it?
Definitely, there's a little bit of extra motivation when it's your home race because you just want to go for broke a little bit more. I think it's a special thing to win at your home race, and because of the way it is now in F2, especially with the feature race being on Sunday, to win the feature race on Grand Prix day for the British Grand Prix weekend, that's going to be a pretty big thing for people to aim for. So yeah, it does.
As Jim says, hopefully we can have some British success this weekend, and Jack, hopefully, a win would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would, wouldn't it? Yeah, we'll see what we can do.
Jack, have you? Sorry to go with a question here, but have you gone to Silverstone as a fan before you got into racing as well? And do you find the corners? While we're talking about Silverstone, do you find some of the corners you enjoyed watching trackside are completely different when you're actually in the car?
Well, I went to Silverstone when I was like 7, I think, or even it must have been younger because I wasn't even racing karts at that stage. I think, 6 or 7 years old, and I went to watch at Brooklands and Luffield, and I just remember walking up to the grandstand, and this was in the V10 era, and before you could even see the cars, the ground was like shaking and the noise was vibrating through your body because it was such a powerful sound. And then when I remember, the only thing I really remember from the race is that I missed the one big piece of action, which was, I think, Jarno Trulli. I think it was Trulli, but like barrel rolling his Renault coming out of the corner just before Brooklands, out of bridge. Yeah, that's right. So I don't know. I didn't have much of an impression of the circuit as an expert back then, but for sure it probably is different because like my parents, when they watch from home, they always say, "Oh, I don't recognize the circuit at all because it looks so different on TV compared to when we're at the track." So I think it probably is a bit different.
It's changed a lot since those bridge days. So I remember that as well. That was. Would you like to have driven that configuration, or was it always been?
Yeah, definitely. The first time I drove Silverstone was pretty much the year straight after they finished the renovation, so I just missed it. But obviously, it's still there, and I walk around it sometimes on the Grand Prix weekend because it's just like a bit of history preserved in tarmac, and now you've just got like people sitting around on it having beers or whatever. It's kind of cool, but also kind of sad.
I went in 2018 was the last time I went, and I was sat on it, watching. And you're right, it is a little bit sad, isn't it? Because you think there's so much history there, but at the same time, it's the new configuration is good as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's thanks a lot, MotoGP, for ruining that.
Exactly. So obviously this is the first track this season that Formula 3 raced at last season, as well as obviously Formula 2 this season. Obviously Bahrain, Monaco and Baku, Formula 3 weren't racing at last season. Drivers such as Oscar Piastri, Teo Pourchaire, Liam Lawson, it's the first time that they're going to be racing at a circuit that they were racing at last season. Is that is that going to give them an advantage, Hannah? Do you think they'll be a little bit calmer knowing that they've done well at this track last season?
I wouldn't say it necessarily gives them an advantage given kind of the jump up between the F2 and F3 cars, but I think it certainly gives them a level of confidence that it'd be less of an unknown. And say, for example, someone like Piastri, you've got to have confidence heading into the weekend, obviously given how well his season's gone, and then getting on the podium last time in F3, and then in Formula Renault Eurocom in 2019, he won both races there. So he knows that track pretty much like the back of his hand. And I think having that kind of experience and knowledge will ultimately help them. I think it maybe will allow an opportunity for, I think, like Piastri and Lawson and Pourchaire, given that they've been up the front for most of the season, will probably still continue to be up front. But maybe for some of those drivers that have gone more towards the midfield that are still kind of getting to grips with them, it will give them a bit of a boost. And I think that level of knowledge will only help them get to grips a little bit easier, obviously, given the limited running that they have in practice. It's not going to be as big of a learning curve than they previously would have had, say, for example, in Monaco. So it'll be exciting to see. I think we'll possibly have a couple of the rookies on the podium because of it, because I can't see, as Jim mentioned, obviously, with having a traditional circuit, you're going to have a lot of them going for incredibly gutsy moves. I think some probably will pay off and some won't. So it'll be interesting. And I'm curious to see which drivers maybe are willing to take the risks that they weren't necessarily as willing to take elsewhere.
Yeah, Teo Porcher might be one of the drivers. We obviously already mentioned that he obviously hurt his wrist in Baku, but he's been cleared fit to race this weekend. That's great news for his title hopes, isn't it, Jim? And I suppose with the new format, that's something that, if you do miss a race through, whether that be injury or, thankfully we don't see that very often, or even COVID this year, if you miss a race because you've tested positive or come into contact with someone, it's going to hurt more this year than in previous years with 3 races.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the luck of the draw as it could work out for some of the drivers who struggled in Monaco. And we saw, I think it was Armstrong again, talking about bad luck, wasn't it? Who had his pole taken away from him by virtue of some engine issues, and his whole weekend screwed up by that. So yeah, it could be huge. I don't know. Porsche is clearly a talent, and I'm sure if you speak to some of the French, he's a second coming of Jesus. But I don't know if this year is going to be his championship year, in all honesty. The thing that impresses me the most with Theo is I saw his Instagram saying he just finished school after winning. So that makes you feel a little bit old, doesn't it? So yeah, maybe we'll see him completely concentrating now. He doesn't have to think about school so much. And I think he's got his driving test out of the way or something as well. Something ridiculous. But yeah, I don't know. I think we could see him score a few more wins this year, reverse grid or otherwise. I don't know if we're going to see him go for the championship. He'll go for it. I don't know if we'll see him take the championship. I don't think we need to see him take the championship. He's got the backing behind him, and he's got enough of a reputation that he's doesn't need to. And I think to a certain extent, all the drivers will want to win the championship. Of course they will. But I think for a certain extent, Piastri is the same, that it doesn't have to be his year this year. With Joe, with Schwartzman, potentially, I think if those guys are going to impress the hand that feeds, then yeah, they really need to take it up a notch and go for the championship. But for Porsche, take another couple of wins this year, finish 6th in the championship, win it next year. Maybe that's the route he can do to get to F1. And I think the way that the programs are lining up, and as Jack is probably aware, getting into Formula One, you have to have these academies backing you, as the current world seems to be. I think Porsche is in a pretty good place actually. If he wins the championship next year, it could be quite good timing for him.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how different drivers, I suppose it is a case of timing, isn't it? And different drivers maybe have an extra year to for things to fall into place for them. I was speaking to Liam Lawson yesterday at the Festival of Speed, and he was saying that for every time you don't win the championship or get promoted straight from Formula 2 into Formula 1, every year that you spend in Formula 2 gets a little bit more difficult to make it to Formula 2. Is that something that you're kind of conscious of, Jack, when you're I suppose thinking about the future, or do you always know you've got a few years to prove yourself, and if it happens, it happens?
I think it depends on the team a little bit. Certainly, Liam's situation, I would feel the same, given Red Bull's track history. And I think that's probably the more common approach. Momentum is really important, and timing that momentum right is also important. So you never want to be sat around in a series for too long if you're not getting results. That was part of the reason why we didn't want to go back and do another year of Formula 2, even though I am now racing there. We didn't want to do another full season because we didn't have the budget to do it with a proper team at the front of the grid. And you're just going to hurt yourself if you go in not fully prepared. So I definitely sympathize with that. On the other hand, I think there is a bit of a recognition from some teams, including Williams, that age is a number. That goes both ways. So you can't be too young and you can't be too old. It's just how good you are. So it's a balance. In the ideal world, you would do F3, F2, F1, winning every time. But it's never as simple as that, I think.
How supportive have Williams been? Obviously, with your career, you've been with him for a couple of years now. Obviously, drove in Sakhir, which was amazing. How supportive have they been?
Yeah, they've been very supportive. It's been quite a consistent trait since I joined. They were very keen to have me on board in the first place. And when the opportunity came up at the end of last year, a lot of teams have reserve drivers, which are not really considered as true replacements should the need come. But they were more than happy to put me in the car and put faith in me to deliver a result, which is very nice to see. And again, coming into this year, when I said, we probably can't do F2, but I'll be doing GT, and I still want to do what I can to help the team and prove that I'm worthy of a seat if that comes up. And they were more than happy to see me do GTs and do something different, learn some new skills, and hopefully I'll get out in the car for an FP1 later this year, and they'll give me a chance there to show what I can do. So it's a very open and very supportive environment.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so as a platform that's all about our fans, we want to give you guys the opportunity, as always, to ask any questions that you have ahead of this weekend. And you won't be surprised to know that all of the questions have been aimed at you, Jack. We've got Ryan Swartz on Twitter he's asked a couple of questions, actually. So his first thing he asked was, if you could change one thing about Formula 2, what would it be? And the second question is, because of fuel saving and tyre management, etc., what percentage are you actually pushing the car at during a race?
Okay, two very good questions. What would I change? That's quite a loaded question. I think if I was going to do a simple change, a quick change, I don't necessarily completely favour the new format that we've gone with this year. This year. Partly because of what I mentioned earlier about if you're a championship contender or if you're one of the better drivers with the better teams, I don't think the system really rewards that, which is a bit, and I don't think that we get a lot out of the entertainment side from that. And it's always a balance. That's why we have reverse grid races in the first place. And Formula 3 and Formula 2 have great popularity, partly because of that. I think the second sprint race is a bit much, personally. And the reduced number of rounds that you get from that is also not great because the drivers don't get to experience as much. In the longer term, and probably the less attainable thing I'd change is cost. I think it would always be great to see costs coming down. I know, especially Formula 3 recently, costs have gone up without really clear reasons why, other than a lack of competition, really. And Formula 2 could always be doing more, I think, for that. So that would be nice. And then the second question was about fuel saving, tyre saving, etc. There isn't really any fuel saving in Formula 2. At least I've never had to do it. Maybe if some calculations have been done wrong and you get a panicked radio message, you have to, but it's very, very rare and exceptional if you have to do that. Tyre saving is, on the other hand, a big part of the game. As we know, Pirelli tyres, to get the best out of them, you do have to baby them a little bit, especially some of the faster tracks like Silverstone. The front left tyre in particular gets absolutely ragged. So you have to take care of that. I think it was Lundgaard he had a straight up puncture because he was just, I'm sure there were other circumstances as well, but it looked like it because he was pushing it quite hard. Maybe had a lockup as well. But it changes track to track, weekend to weekend. So I can't give you a full answer on that, but on average, maybe you're at 9 out of 10 in the race rather than a 10 out of 10.
Still pushing hard. You guys wouldn't get out of the car sweating if you wasn't pushing, right? So it's got to be.
Yeah, even when you're driving at 9 out of 10, that doesn't mean a 9 out of 10 on effort. It's still hard work.
And at Tommy Carroll on Twitter asks, obviously, when Formula 2 is a spec series, it's a lot easier. Is it a lot easier to hop straight back into the car after some time away? Obviously, you spent a bit of time, well, I suppose it was only one round in the end away. And do the characteristics remain, relatively the same?
Yes, I mean, when I jumped into the HWA car in Monaco, for example, it only took a couple of laps to feel like I was back at home a little bit. So, there is definitely a limited amount that you can do from team to team. On the other hand, when you're talking about tenths of a second, those limited things become very, very important. And clearly some teams do it better than others. And there's a lot of resource being pushed now. I think Formula 2 teams are increasingly becoming mini Formula 1 teams, which is also part of the reason why costs are going up. I mean, I know some teams have ops rooms where they have engineers stationed remotely away from the track to digest data and help the team where they can. And obviously that requires manpower and a place to put them. And it's becoming very, very a bit more of a technical battleground as the years go on. So there are differences for sure.
And Luke_Buckle12 on Instagram asks, how important is trail braking when racing? And secondly, how was it? We've covered this slightly, but how was it racing? Obviously, the Sakir Grand Prix last year.
Trail braking is very important. It's a bit of a difficult question because that's like asking, because trail braking is just something you do nearly all the time. I know if you go to the kart track or you do a course with an instructor at a track, they talk about trail braking as if it's quite a specific skill, which it is, and every driver has to learn it. But every corner to a degree requires trail braking. It's just that some need it more. Brooklands needs a hell of a lot because you're doing the braking and entry for a really long time, and you need to manipulate the car for a long time there. Whereas the club chicane going like the last corner, it's a straight braking zone and then you turn in, and there's a very, very small period of time where you're going to trail brake, but it is there. So it's a bit like, I don't know, it's like saying how important is ankle rotation in walking. I mean, it's very important, I guess, because you have to do it all the time, but it's not the be all and end all.
Cool. And Jim, I think you have a question for Jack. Is that right?
I've got a couple if you'd be so kind, Fraser. But yeah, Williams, you're a reserve driver there, and they called upon you, I presume, with the super license points because they've got a growing roster of drivers there, and that was great. But so you've been there for a couple of years, and what's it like now with the takeover? How's it changed day to day for you?
Not a lot has changed day to day. Obviously, the people in management have changed. So, I joined the team when it was still family run, which in itself was pretty great to see and to at least take in that bit of history, I guess, because I'm not sure if we'll ever see something like that again in Formula One. Yeah, probably at some point. But now we have Jos there and Doralton, and they're doing a pretty great job. Changes are being made slowly, but not without quite a lot of consideration. And it's all coming from a good place. So there are quite a few new faces in the factory when I go around, and it's difficult to keep up with the new hires sometimes, but it's good. The team's growing. And I think people are quite happy about it, to be honest.
That's great. I'm really hoping Williams go further, of course. And the second question is actually tied to, I guess, your mixed heritage, that you've got the Korean element, you've got an English element, and then you've got tartan.
English.
Yeah, well, this is what I wanted to speak to you about, actually. You've got tartan.
Very careful. My dad's going to come knocking.
But you were born in London, and then you've got the
Yeah.
Scottish element, you've got the South Korean.
Yeah,
So how has
absolutely.
that impacted on you with how, I don't know, even finding sponsors? Is that something you consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, for those who don't know, my dad is Scottish, my mum is South Korean. I am probably best described as English, even though I would never describe myself as that because that wouldn't go down well. I describe myself as British, but for sure, it's something that drivers before me have done before, have done trying to find sponsors using their heritage, especially if it's from countries that offer more marketing potential than where they were born. So for me, that usually means South Korea, but it can also mean Scotland. You know, we've been in talks with companies from both regions, and I've even had sponsorship from some. So it's something that we're always trying to work on. And, you know, making the jump to Formula One, of course, you have to have the talent, or at least some. But it helps if you can bring some sponsorship to the team and to show that you're a marketable person as well. So definitely that's something that we work on.
We saw David Coulthard, of course, in Williams, so you never know.
Exactly, yeah. Just have to work on my Scottish accent. It's not great.
I lived in Scotland too, so you're just the same as me.
And Hannah, did you have a question?
Yeah, so obviously it was great to see you make your Formula One debut in Sakhir. I wanted to know, were there any lessons you took from Formula 2 into your F1 debut, and any lessons you've now taken back from that debut to Formula 2?
That's quite a hard one, because I think nowadays the gap between Formula 2 and Formula 1 is massive. They're almost like, to call it a feeder series is stretching it, I think, because in Formula 1 you're answering to a team of 20 or 30 trackside engineers. In F2 you have one or maybe two if you're lucky. You have 6 or 7 mechanics per car in F1 to make you comfortable and to get things right. You have one or two in F2. And then the biggest difference is you've got a team in total of 500 or 600 people versus a team of 12 in F2. And you have a lot more track time in F1, a lot more data, information rich as a environment, where F2 is the complete opposite. You know, we're not allowed to run a lot of sensors. We're not allowed to have too much manpower, even though people are trying to find ways around that. So it's very difficult to draw similarities between the two, apart from the driving, which is quite an obvious one. So going into the F1 round at Sakhir, to be honest, most of the stuff that I was drawing on was my previous experience in F1 cars from testing and doing the FP1 session earlier that year with Williams. And I learned a lot during that weekend. Coming back to F2, I think, again, it's the same problem. It's very difficult to bring back ideas, because a lot of the things that you think about and work on in F1, if you try to bring that to an F2 environment, you either don't have the data to be able to analyze those things in that much detail, or you don't have the track time to test the things you want to do, or you don't have the tires. We're just really limited in F2 compared to F1. For sure, there are things that I take confidence from, having done that weekend, knowing that I can do certain things well and other things not so well, and where I can improve, because you have a lot more people critiquing you. And that's something that I've brought back to my driving on all counts. But yeah, it's a tough one.
Are there any exclusives you want to give us, Jack? Any news on when you'll be announced at Williams? Is that when George Russell goes to Mercedes, or?
No exclusives. No, that's all a work in progress.
But if you do find out, we'll be the first ones to know, right?
Obviously, yeah. I've got you on speed dial, so it's all good.
Perfect, guys. You got it there from Jack. There you go. What are your expectations for this weekend? Are points realistic in terms of targets? Is it a podium? How's this weekend looking?
I don't really know. I would definitely like to get some points, because I feel like we deserved them last time out. and didn't get them. And it feels a bit crap having a big fat 0 next to my name, even if I've not been here the whole year. So got to fix that. And if I could get on the podium, that would be pretty awesome at my home event. And I'm not discounting that as a possibility, because I think the team are capable of making some big steps with the car, and I'm getting more and more comfortable with them as well. So yeah, I just have to qualify in the top 10, and then anything can happen. So it's all good.
And is this gonna? I don't know whether you can say this or not, but is this going to be your last weekend in Formula 2, or is that unknown at the moment? You're just going to see what happens.
So it's unknown. I mean, I'm not inclined to do the whole season with HWA, and they're not inclined either, because this is not a long-term solution for them. They need a driver who can come and bring budget and give them a full season, because I have clashes later in the year anyway with the calendar, as I wasn't planning on doing it. So we're doing it race by race at the moment. They've obviously asked me to come back for Silverstone. We'll reassess afterwards, and I kind of hope that they can get a proper solution in place.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and for your brilliant insight. We're definitely wishing you the best of luck, and I'm sure we speak on behalf of the motorsport community, wishing you luck this weekend, hopefully points or even a podium. That would be nice, wouldn't it? So best of luck for that. Jim, Hannah, thank you for joining us as always. We will, of course, be back next week to review all of the action off the back of round 4, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, you can either get involved in the conversation on Discord, or you can of course, getting involved in a conversation on social media. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and leave any comments you have about this video in the comments section. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.